It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's roundtable on recovery, risk and resilience, rethinking the future of EU-South Caucasus relations. My name is Gwendolyn Sasse. I'm the director of ZOIS, the Center for East European and International Studies. And I'm particularly happy that we have such a stellar lineup for the roundtable on a very topical issue, or a number of topical issues that will be discussed. If we think about recent months, then of course the restart of the Azerbaijan-Armenian war, but also trends like an increasing polarization in domestic Georgian politics, and also the effects of COVID on the region and on the individual countries in the South Caucasus are important issues we will touch upon. I will leave in a moment the discussion, the moderation to Dr. Stefan Meister. So the discussion is in very capable hands. He is the head of the program International Order and Democracy at the German Council on Foreign Relations. But I wanted at the beginning to express my happiness about this cooperation between ZOIS and the University of Jena, an important interdisciplinary hub in the study of the Caucasus. And we'll hear in a moment from the chair of Caucasian Studies from the University of Jena, from Diana Forka. And at ZOIS, this event takes place within or under the umbrella of the ZOIS Caucasus Network, an initiative ZOIS researchers started a couple of years ago. This network is a network of researchers, policymakers, think tankers who meet regularly to discuss research and topical issues in the Caucasus. And so without further ado, Diana, I hand over to you. And then after that, I think we start the discussion.
So thank you, everybody. My name is Diana Forka. I'm professor of Caucasus Studies at the University of Jena. I'm a linguist myself, and I mainly study languages of the Eastern Caucasus. But I'm also the project leader of this new project that is devoted to the concept of resilience within the EU foreign policy in the South Caucasus. And within the project, we investigate different aspects of this concept of resilience. So not just the EU foreign policy reading of that term, let's say, but we also study, I myself together with other colleagues study the issue of minority languages and minority ethnic groups and the contribution of their language, for instance, to the concept of resilience. But within the project, we also organize different events, and this is actually our first roundtable discussion. We plan to have 2 more such events next year and the year after. The project runs for 3 years, and we are very happy that we can organize this roundtable together with ZOIS. And at some point, we hope we will have a real event in Berlin together. But this time, okay, it's an online event, which is better than nothing, of course. And I'm very happy to have this very interesting roundtable discussion on a topic that I'm not a political scientist, so this is not my field of expertise, but I'm the more happier to learn about the concept of resilience. And I'm very happy that we have so interesting speakers today. And I will also now basically leave the room and just hand over the discussion to Stefan Meister, who is the moderator.
Warm welcome also from my side. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this great panel. I'm very happy that we have only female panel, which I can moderate. I think that's really great on the South Caucasus. This is not always the case. I just want to say, just in technical, because I think there's some confusion. So only the speakers are seen, and you can ask questions then and also give comments in the chat, and I can read out them later. Just already to announce this and not being confused that maybe some people are not seen. I just want to give a short introduction about how EU understands resilience, or what is this policy of resilience of the EU, before I introduce the speakers and before we go into the discussion. I think resilience has become a catchword also in many areas, in many fields also of EU policy. But it has become a key element also of EU's policy towards Eastern Partnership countries. And looking into the 2020 Strategic Foresight Report, which puts forward resilience as a new compass for EU policies, resilience is defined as the ability not only to withstand and cope with challenges, but also to undergo transitions in a sustainable, fair, and democratic manner. Since the Eastern Partnership policy was initiated in 2009, the EU has established goals and targets for cooperation with the Eastern Partnership countries, which was, for instance, recently framed by the 20 deliverables for 2020. The latest and very important document is from July 2021, the joint staff working document titled Recovery, Resilience and Reform, Post-2020 Eastern Partnership Priorities, which lists its goals and commitments with regard to contributing to reforms and economic recovery in the 6 Eastern Partnership countries, also having in mind the pandemic. And the joint communication Eastern Partnership policy beyond 2020, reinforcing resilience, and council conclusions set out a new vision for the partnership. It identifies strengthening resilience as an overreaching policy framework with 5 long-term objectives. So I think these 5 long-term objectives, they somehow also define how the EU wants to develop resilience in Eastern Partnership countries. So the first point is together for resilient, sustainable and integrated economies. Very strong economic approach we can see here. Together for accountable institutions, the rule of law and security. Third, together towards environmental and climate resilience. Fourth, for a resilient digital transformation. And fifth, for resilient, fair and inclusive societies. The overall objective of strengthening resilience is structured around 2 pillars, which are first, again, economic approach, investment, support by an economic and investment plan. And second, governance, or good governance, you can also say. So these are the key pillars. And to support socioeconomic recovery with the pandemic, investing in competitive and sustainable economies and connectivity is a priority of the EU with regard to this region. To strengthen longer-term resilience, EU partner countries' joint investments will be on the so-called Build Back Better agenda and do not significant harm to environment and climate principles. So these are the catchwords also for the programs of the EU. And I think this is the latest development. This is linked to the digital and green transition in the context of the Green Deal, which is also a comprehensive and ambitious policy of the EU. So you have a lot of policies here. Just a short assessment. If we look into the latest Eastern Partnership documents, my impression is there's a dominance of economic policy with very concrete deliverables, targets, and flagship projects, while at the same time the government's part is rather less developed. So, and I think this is a very important part, in my opinion, looking into the South Caucasus and in the entire region and linking both, I think, is very, very crucial. From an EU perspective, the South Caucasus is rather a peripheral region. I think major challenges are of security and geopolitical nature, while the EU is focusing on internal reforms, governance, and economic growth. So I think we see here also some other challenges where the EU might not have really answers to. We observed democratic backsliding in Georgia, which was for a couple of years the best performer on reforms. We saw the Second Karabakh War as a game changer also for the region, because it undermined also multilateral conflict management and the OSCE Minsk format, and set also a precedent for military solution of the conflict. And at the same time, Russia has successfully set up a new format without the EU and the US, while also circumventing the OSCE Minsk format. So we see some really fundamental changes in the region. So, and I think just to conclude on this short introduction, what we observe is that EU's reform and transformation policy is not sustainable. In my opinion, a reform process, democratization, fighting corruption are not irreversible. To focus on economic reforms and growth is not sufficient. I think the challenges are much more comprehensive. So, and I'm happy to discuss this here with 4 excellent experts and speakers, which I really very shortly want to introduce. I'm very happy to have Professor Maja Pantikidze, who is a professor at the Caucasus University in Georgia. She holds a PhD in philology and German studies and graduated also from the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena and Tbilisi State University. So we have another link here to Jena. I also graduated from this university. Apart from her academic career, she served as ambassadors to Germany and the Kingdom of Netherlands for Georgia. And she was Georgia's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2012 to 2014. So really also academic experiences and practical experiences in foreign policy. And so it's great to have you here, Maya. We have Leila Aliyeva, who is currently Richard Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. And she's affiliated with the Russian and Eastern European Studies Center at the Oxford University School of Global and Area Studies. Leila held several research fellowships, like for instance at the Institut für Kulturwissenschaften in Vienna, Harvard University, Woodrow Wilson Center, Kennan Institute, Johns Hopkins University, SAIS. And she was a director, I think, of the leading think tank in Azerbaijan before she had to leave the country. Leila, it's great also to have you here. Then we have Dr. Shushanik Minasyan, who is a research associate at the University of Bonn and postdoc DAAD researcher at SAIS Johns Hopkins University. She holds also a PhD from the University of Bonn. Shushanik was visiting professor at HEDQ Media Factory in Yerevan, at Andras University in Budapest, and University of Warsaw. I just named some of them. And she's also country expert for Armenia for the Bertelsmann Transformation Index. Also warm welcome to you. And we have Sonja Katharina Schiffers, who is director of the South Caucasus Office of Heinrich Böll Foundation in Tbilisi. She received her PhD from the Freie University of Berlin with a dissertation on Russian and Turkish illiberal external influence in Bosnia and Georgia. So also an academic background on Georgia, on the developments in the region. Sonja worked at the German Bundestag as a senior advisor for Eastern European affairs with the Allianz 19 and the Greens, and also as a foreign policy advisor of one of the Green MPs. She was visiting fellow at the German Institute for International Affairs, International and Security Affairs, and I think she was one of the key persons to build up Polis 180. So also, Sonja, great to have you here. I want to give you like around 7 minutes, maybe a little bit more, but really not much more, because we have 7 speakers, and I already spoke too long to elaborate on two main questions. So can you elaborate on 3 key domestic risks, describing one main regional risk and chances to overcome the risk, and what could be done to recover from the risk with a focus on political elites and civil society? And I would say we have 3 country experts here, so who can have a focus on the country. And maybe Sonja, if you can also focus where you think this is really crucial, but to maybe to have a kind of a comparison, I think that would be great. And let's start with Maya Panchikidze as the first speaker. So now you are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can hear you. Great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation to this roundtable. I'm really very pleased to meet you all today. I was very excited to get in touch with Friedrich Schiller University of Jena, my alma mater, as you mentioned, and to get the possibility to visit this wonderful city. I'm here now in Jena after so many years. And let me express my gratitude to Professor Diana Forka and her team for keeping Jena as a center for Caucasus studies in Germany. In my short presentation, let me focus on challenges Georgia is facing today, local self-government elections 2021, the extremely tense, polarized and instable political situation, the factor of ex-President Saakashvili, and the role of EU in solving the problems. Local self-government elections in October 2021 were perceived as the general test of legitimacy for the Georgian dream, especially since it was inscribed in the April 19th EU-brokered agreement. Despite the fact that some smaller parties like For Georgia of former Prime Minister Gacharia, Lelo, European Georgia, Druar, or others gained increased support of voters, Georgian Dream won in 62 of 63 cities and municipalities. Only one small city was won by the United National Movement. The United Opposition and UNM said the elections were void, neither free nor fair. The Georgian Dream took away and stole victories from the opposition in many municipalities. Observers have repeatedly pointed the misuse of administrative resources by the ruling party, alleged continuation of the malign practices such as vote buying or pressure or intimidation of voters and opposition candidates. Georgia's politics still remains by and large a bipartisan game. The two arch enemies, Georgian Dream and United National Movement, squash the middle ground in their combat, both consciously and as collateral damage. The illegal arrival and arrest of ex-President Saakashvili on the eve of elections polarized the atmosphere additionally and mobilized the support for two major parties. Saakashvili's arrest, his hunger strike and mistreatment in the jail, non-acceptance of the results of elections caused permanent rallies and protests in the streets of almost all big cities of Georgia. The supporters demand Saakashvili's release and snap parliamentary elections. They consider the former president a political prisoner. Some human rights groups in and outside of Georgia cast doubts on the fairness of the trials that sentenced him. Saakashvili has been convicted on 2 separate charges in absentia and awaits trial on 3 other charges, including the illegal border crossing. After all, Georgia became again a political headache for its foreign partners. The latest developments showed indeed the increasingly confrontation course of the government of Georgia with the European Union. But I don't agree that the European Union is inactive and powerless as an actor. EU ambassador to Georgia was extremely clear and strong in his remarks on the latest developments. He commented the appointment of 2 members of the High Council of Justice as hasty, non-transparent and non-competitive, and listed further setbacks of the judiciary and rule of law. In his words, they were at odds with Georgia's commitments aimed at increasing the independence, accountability, quality and trust in the judiciary, in line with the EU-Georgia Association Agreement. He said it follows the further appointments to the Supreme Court in July, which lacked integrity, objectivity, and credibility, the failure to fulfill the necessary judicial conditions to receive an extra 75 million euros in EU macrofinance assistance by September 2021. The non-adoption in September of the constitutional amendments on the Prosecutor General's appointments and the lack of credible investigation and prosecution of the organizers of the July violence targeting over 50 journalists and activists. Finally, he said that the EU's assistance to Georgia remains conditional on progress on key reforms. The only positive effect of the political crisis in Georgia was the engagement and increased political role and influence of European Union, personal involvement of the European Council President Charles Michel, and the EU-mediated agreement, which resolved a 6-month political crisis in the country, following the 2020 parliamentary elections, and proposed large-scale electoral and judiciary reforms. It was a clear statement of European Union's leading role in the region, despite the fact that the ruling party left the agreement and not every goal has been achieved. The relations with the European Union do not fit into the model of classical foreign relations with two sovereign actors trying to develop peaceful and mutually beneficial cooperation. In our case, the European Union is trying to facilitate the transformation, development, and Europeanization of the partner country. On its way to the European family, Georgia has to solve a lot of most complex tasks. The occupation and peaceful restoration of the territorial integrity of the country, reforms in all spheres, development of democratic institutions, and promotion of liberal European values in the society, which is maybe not always ready to share the European worldview. And Georgia needs help from the EU to become a truly European state. I think the European Union doesn't need groundbreaking changes and rethinking of its policy towards its partners. It only needs to intensify the foreign policy it is already conducting. More leadership, more engagement, more strictness and clarity, principled pragmatism, flexibility, tailor-made approaches, and focusing on the civil society, which will learn to accept the coalition rule. These are important, and it doesn't matter how we call the new approach, resilience or something else. The main goal should be to consider the rethinking as an opportunity to make relations more effective. EU and NATO integration of Georgia's foreign policy priorities is the official message of almost every political party in Georgia. The ruling party goes even further and announces that Georgia is moving closer to the European Union and NATO and preparing to apply for full EU membership in 2024. For time being, the words and deeds of Georgian dream diverge. And we all know that the European Union does not treat Georgia as a candidate country, but it can take the political elite of Georgia at their word and force it to focus on the necessary reforms and transformation and fulfillment of the association agreement and DCFTA, which are not less ambitious formats. I think I had my 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, thank you for sticking to the time and to your 7 minutes. Can I just ask just a follow-up question, a quick follow-up question? So I agree with you that there was a lot of engagement around the parliamentary election and the crisis also afterwards by the EU. Charles Michel was also in Brussels. There was a special negotiator also. At the same time, I don't see that this crisis is solved. I think the polarization is going on, backsliding is also going on. And the question is, I think Georgia is one of the countries the EU really has leverage, still has somehow leverage in terms of its financial commitments, in terms also of the commitments of the government to enter the EU. So, and I just to ask, does the EU really uses its leverage? Is there really enough conditionality? Is there enough pressure also on the elites? Is there sufficient involvement of civil society also in monitoring processes? So does the EU really uses its leverage to impact maybe more on a more substantial change also? Because I see here rather a further backsliding than hold on of this negative process.
Yes, I totally agree. We are speaking now about South Caucasus, and there are 3 countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. And Georgia is the only country in Caucasus which signed an association agreement with the European Union, with the DCFTA, which is also very important. This is for political association and economic integration of Georgia with the European Union. And the European Union, or we have this instrument of association agreement, which is a very strong instrument. And what I say is that I was very happy to see the involvement of European Union in solving the problems, the political crisis after elections 2020 in Georgia. As I said, not every goal was achieved, but the activities of the European Union, the presence of European Union was very visible, and that was very good. The second point is indeed that the government says that 2024, it will apply for full membership of the European Union. I think this is something we all can use. This can use the society, the civil society in Georgia. It can be used by our partners outside of Georgia, from the European Union, of course, and also from the United States. And I think that the statements we are facing in the last weeks from the United States and the European Union in Georgia are very strong. We have a very changed rhetorics from all our partners. And I think this is the way the European Union and others should continue. More pressure is needed. Many people, the opposition is speaking, for example, about financial sanctions too. And I see this 75 millions in September as a financial sanction against Georgia. And everybody knows, the government said we don't need the money from the European Union, but everybody knows that we need this money from the European Union. And it was really a pressure from EU, and that was the correct way to deal with the government in Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just looking into the chat, I think just want to mention that there will be a meeting afterwards and everybody can join also for an informal discussion. I already wanted to mention this. And also you can ask questions in the chat during our discussion. So, and I want to hand over to Leila Aliyeva to look deeper into Azerbaijan and resilience. You need to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here and in such a distinguished panel, and also to speak from Berlin, unfortunately not being able to see you personally. I agree on many points with my colleague from Georgia, Maya Panchikidze, about the necessity of EU playing a greater role and actually visible activization of the European Union in the region as a whole, particularly after the crisis erupted last year and the war which took place in Karabakh. But first, I would like to touch upon the term resilience, which is, in a sense, an adjustment to the diverse and uneven results of the transition and EU policies in the neighborhood. So, from my point of view, this is a rather vague and more blurred term, which is more diplomatic than the previous ones. It's not free on ambiguity. It's subject of multiple interpretations. So just to give an example, I suppose it can be interpreted in a different way depending on which actor is speaking about it. For instance, some time ago, I remember one representative of the multinational corporations moved from Azerbaijan to Ukraine, and I asked him where was it easier or better to work, in Azerbaijan or in Ukraine? And the answer was, of course, in Azerbaijan. And when I asked why, he said, because in Azerbaijan, you give, meaning bribe, to one person and the thing is done, the deed is done. But in Ukraine, you give it to many and the deed is not done and the business is not done. So this is one apparently understanding of resilience from the point of view of the business sector. Similarly, authoritarian resilience might also be acceptable at the level of this conceptual framework, because it might last quite long, the authoritarian stability, as we all know, and thanks to ability of the authoritarian leaders to create imitation institutions and to get adjusted to shocks and various conflicts and crises. So definitely, I think the people on the one hand who were criticizing this new term. They have the foundation, the basis to do that. Justification of this, like Bertelsmann paper, which was, I think, issued in 2017, who said that instead of strengthening its conditionality and normative aspects, it cuts back on its transformation agenda. So speaking about domestic risks, I would argue that all the domestic risks are inevitably connected with the external factors and external. It's not just supported by domestic issues, but I think the recognition of the fact that EU had over-ambitious agenda before, based not on the accurate analysis, and in fact, what wasn't happening is that EU policies did not address the individual obstacles to reform in each case. And I think one of these individual obstacles to reform, which was not addressed in the EU policies, was that they were dealing with the rentier state and oil-rich state like Azerbaijan. It's the only oil-rich state among all the Eastern Partnership countries. But there was not a recognition in any of the EU documents that the energy agenda does affect and does interfere with the other agendas and democracy promotion or transformation agenda of the EU. So that, as a result, led to the fact that there was very little progress on this way, while energy cooperation, against the background of developing energy cooperation. So I would stress three major domestic challenges. It's corruption, controlled elections, and the disbalance of state versus society. All of them are three challenges that are also supported externally due to the vested interests in the energy agenda of Azerbaijan. So it's not enough to address the issue domestically, but it's also important to do a significant effort from the side of international organizations and different governments, the Western European governments. So last elections, as you know, in 2020, parliamentary elections let only one person from the opposition candidates to be in the parliament, which is largely remained one-party parliament. We know that with the term of the president in office was increased to 7 years. These amendments canceled term limits of president in office, and there was no change, which is quite substantial, in principle of formation of electoral commissions. So oil dependency remains quite a serious challenge for Azerbaijan. It's a risk, and it's actually on increase, and greater share is planned for the budget 2022. 54.8% of the transfer from the oil fund is expected, and less from the non-oil sector. There was a plan to reduce transfers, the presidential decree in 2016 to reduce transfers from 50% to 15% by 2025. But it's, as our independent expert consider this target, to reach this target is impossible in 3 years. Corruption as a systemic feature remains in place, although I would say that there is less corruption on the lower levels because of the trend of monopolization of corruption and the monopolization of political power, greater monopolization of political power but it does affect governance, so and inequality. So the oil reliance on oil also undermined the professional bureaucratic institutions and governance, combined with inadequately low social benefits and compensations, whether it's pensions, COVID-related, or war veterans, child benefits, which are still not being paid in spite of the big societal requests. Salaries are all inadequately low as compared to the income from oil. So this creates another sort of risk, possible risk. And the greater disbalance of state versus society, particularly after 2014 crackdown on civil society, that's a long-term process. And that has never been taken into account in the EU's relationship and EU's policies in Azerbaijan. In fact, Azerbaijan was the lowest recipient of the EU aid directly to the civil society since early 90s from the US and EU also, based on the assumption that Azerbaijan is an oil-rich country, while it should have been totally opposite, because the enormous, resource curse as a rule weakens the society versus state, increases the power of state, and you can call it, of course, resilience of the society. But in fact, it's rather a disbalance of state versus society. So that all affects the lack of freedoms and liberties. As a result, as I said, because each of these challenges has an inevitable external component, because corruption, as Pandora Papers evidence comes from Pandora Papers, that there is spills, of course, beyond the borders. So it includes the foreign partners in crime, and also the elections, 2003 elections, for instance. If we look at the 2003 elections and compare it with the current elections in Belarus of European Union, you can see a tremendous difference there. So again, the external factor is quite important. It creates the sense of lack of trust in their own capacity to change the situation, to transform in the society. So when we speak about trust, it's not so much trust to each other, but it's trust in your own capacity to change something in the country, because the rival seems to be so powerful. It's not just your country, but it's sort of solidarity of the other governments of the other country with the EU government. So with COVID, and I think I should finish soon, it seems EU was more free. I think less was involved in bureaucratic procedures, and it was quite quick in reacting in the COVID problems in the country. But Azerbaijan, again, was the lowest recipient of the lowest aid from EU on COVID. However, the human rights defenders noticed an interesting and puzzling trend that in spite of the declared 95% of population being at least once vaccinated, the number of deaths has been increasing, starting with the December 11. On conflict, as you know, tension remains. And Azerbaijan still doesn't have monopoly on force as a state on its territory. It has actually peacekeeping troops of one foreign state and armed groups of the other. So the situation is quite uncertain. And liberated territories at the moment are being restored. So the major investments are going to be directed there, not in the other parts of Azerbaijan. But people still cannot go there, and there is quite a lot of dissatisfaction why the people are not there. And, the government justifies it by the mining, that there's still, the territories are mined, or there are big projects on creation of the smart cities there and things like that. So external risk, yeah, should I stop? Okay.
1 minute, you can have a final word, so I don't want to interrupt you, but
okay,
just come to an end.
So basically, I think we can come to the EU's sort of role probably during the second round of questions. But what I wanted to say that definitely EU drew some conclusion, because one can see that much greater activities of EU now as a mediator in Karabakh conflict. There is some sort of competition with Russia. And I think the fact that conflict got regionalized is partly due to the passive passivity of EU, which has been observed during 30 years. And I think that, hopefully, that regardless of whether they call it resilience, the objective resilience or something, but EU's activities, increased activities, will probably direct as a normative actor. And that I will stress, only as a normative actor might direct the development in Azerbaijan in a right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just very quick, maybe a little bit provocative question, picking up what you have said. So the EU as a normative power, I think, has supported democratic reforms in several countries. But if we look now into these countries, like Georgia, for instance, but also Moldova, even if it's maybe on a good track, it's very, very fragile. But also Armenia, for instance, now after the war. We see as an alternative model authoritarian modernization, like in Azerbaijan. And there seems to be also a success in a way. So does the EU does it not oversee also that there are other models of modernization and maybe the lack of engagement with authoritarian states which have their own way of modernization? Is this not also a deficit of EU policy? Looking in the current situation we have now in the South Caucasus, where Azerbaijan seems to, how to say it, I think it's the strongest player, yeah. It's beside the external players which are there. So is there not also a kind of a failure of this normative approach from the EU side and the lack of sustainability of these democratic reforms?
No, I think there were a few serious issues which were lacking. First of all, if you speak about when I say normative actor, I mean the in-application to the security issues. Because in the conflict, for instance, EU did not support the sense of each player as the independent subject of international relations. Rather, it supported the dependency syndrome on, in this country. So it is, in a sense, was contributing to the post-Soviet legacy in the region, just trying to replace Moscow by its sort of role there, rather than encouraging the personal responsibility, individual responsibility of countries to regulate relationship with the neighbors, and there could have been a few ways to do that, but I think EU was not sort of eager, or it has seen its role rather low and small. I mean, it openly was saying that we're supporting the OSCE process. OSCE process was absolutely hopeless as a result. But EU also decreased its role. If you ask the democratic community, or in general society in Azerbaijan, they would say that there is ignorance or indifference to the democratic transformation from the side of the West in Azerbaijan, to Azerbaijan. They are aware that the energy agenda was priority in relations with Azerbaijan. So there is no, I think, alternative to the transformation according to the liberal democracy, because we all watch the direction of ultimate migration of the countries, and they're all lead to the West. So I wouldn't, according to the latest data, 800 Azerbaijani migrants were deported from Germany. And, it's just a small part of the migrants which go to the West. So I don't think that Azerbaijan demonstrates the example of authoritarian modernization. I think it's just, it's probably temporary, whatever is happening now.
Okay, thank you. Answer taken. So let's shift to Armenia. Shoshanik Manasyan, so I would give you your 7 to 8 minutes.
Thank you for having me here, and I welcome all participants and guests. So, well, Armenia. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that this word resilience is appropriate for post-war Armenia, because we see that current political and social situation in the country is very fragile. The war in Nagorno-Karabakh caused several political interruptions and instability, which came on top of quite a serious COVID crisis last year. And this has seriously tested Armenia's political, economic, and social resilience. And we can also say that these processes have seriously broke country's reform movement. What we observe now, the government has lost much credibility and authority over this war, and Prime Minister Pashinyan has been badly weakened by the loss in the war. And his political standing appears to be constantly diminishing. And the ruling party is now fighting for its political survival and cannot engineer any solutions to overcome the current political crisis, because we see that the country is experiencing every day some dangers or military attacks in border regions with Azerbaijan. But the government, really, the ruling party is not able to engineer any solutions to overcome this political crisis. However, I think this development is not only due to the war. After the Village Revolution in 2018, the new government promised to implement democratic reforms in all state sectors, like strengthening of civil society and media sector, and strengthen pluralistic system, political system, and so on. However, we are observing a completely different reality in the country, in Armenia. The reforms were very patchy and very superficial, without any serious impact. And actually, we see also similar corruption models during the new government. Despite some progresses, clientelism and patronage still pose serious problems in administrative structure. And there are also even practices of a new clientelism involving groups to the government. What is very worrying, the processes in media landscape. Media landscape is also experiencing worrying restrictions. Armenian authorities have adopted new regulations that seriously restrict journalist movement in the parliament building. And last year, restrictions on the freedom of expression were extended by the Armenian government to prohibit statements criticizing the authorities. I think the third risk in the country is the increasing weakening of civil society, because Armenia had once very strong society, and Armenian civil society cannot react now on these developments. For one simple reason, after the Velvet Revolution, the majority of civic players moved into the government, and the fact is a vacuum in this field. As a result, the civic landscape has been considerably weakened. Now there are only some experienced civic stakeholders who are experiencing their discontent with government policy, but in general, the civic landscape in Armenia is split and paralyzed. About the consequences of Bergkarabakh conflict war in the region, the consequences are already shaping the region and are the critical changes in South Caucasus. And we see that the region experiences geopolitical changes of a tectonic level. So Moscow is continuously expanding its military posture and matching it with an uncompromising and assertive information campaign. And after the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, Moscow has set up its military presence in the whole Black Sea region. And Russia is now in the driver's seat as never before, because it has troops on the ground in all three Caucasus countries, 2 with the consent of the host, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and 1 without, Georgia. We see also a new geopolitical player, so security player or political player, it's Turkey, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Turkey wasn't only economic player, but Turkey sees itself now as the preeminent political and military power in this region, in Black Sea region, after Middle East. And in recent years, Ankara has begun to emphasize its Eurasian character and is trying to build its influence in the whole region. Its aggressive behavior in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict and the demonstration of growing defense industry made clear Turkey seeks to be a central player in the region rather than a bridge between East and West. And Ankara is now actively pushing a new multilateral mechanism for the region called 3+3, and which would include the Caucasus states plus 3 regional powers, Russia and Iran. And it's not really clear how are they going to fulfill this project, but it's a very ambitious project. These developments, why are these developments important? They are important for Western countries, for the EU and for Washington, because these developments are also reflect the decline of Western involvement in the region. Regional players, Russia and Turkey, plan to reopen trade routes, which would increase the connectivity, but could also further sideline the collective West. And this concerns not only the infrastructure projects, the collective West's limited presence is also seen in the way that the Western peacemaking standards and conflict resolution methods are being trumped by Russian alternatives. So, about recovery mechanism, unfortunately, I don't see any mechanism from Armenian side when we are talking about Armenia. I'm not see really any mechanism from Armenian side, and I'm not really sure. It's very complicated to assess whether the government is not willing to promote this mechanism or their attempts are blocked by external actors. It's really complicated. But the consequence of the war challenges Armenia's statehood, demands, and government trying to prevent the loss of power, but it could be really complicated for this government in Armenia. Because the Russian imposed agreement cemented Russian position in the country with wide implications for Armenian political stability, statehood, democracy, and economic reforms. Faced with the new limitation to Armenia's option regarding the West and its capacity to deepen ties with the EU in particular, the outlook for Armenia's resiliency seems bleak. It's really complicated because EU's position after the war is not really clear in Armenia. And EU's position during the war was also not clear in Armenia. One outcome of the conflict is very clear. Western countries were pushed to the margins and will need to work hard to make themselves relevant again, in particular the EU. Attempts by France and the United States to broker a ceasefire failed, and when fighting broke out, Washington and other European capitals were barely visible, and they lost public credibility among Armenians during the fighting, and European statements of concern at the death of civilians and reports of human rights abuses were derided on social media, and especially on the Armenian side. So it will be
to an end, please.
Yeah. It will be very complicated for the EU to restore this trust, to get this trust back, because the EU was very active in last year in Armenia, and the government shows really was really willing to cooperate with the EU, but social, we had also the civic landscape was also, were also willing to cooperate with the European Union, but it will be very hard to restart or to update this engagement. And so.
Thank you very much. Just maybe also very short, very quick, and I really want to ask also the audience to ask questions in the chat. I think we have already first questions, and I would, after Sonia, I would also open for this question, or will read out the questions. Can I ask you again, so what do you think is the main issue why there is no resilience in Armenia? I think Armenia is a weak state. It has lost sovereignty. It is really in a very fragile situation. Do you see, first of all, a problem in the political elites, in the weak civil society, in the geopolitical situation the country is? So why this failure after the Velvet Revolution, which was such a dynamic also in the country and so big hopes? Why this has failed? I think maybe it's a big question, but where do you see the main issues? Just to name them. Yeah.
Yes, I would say geopolitical situation and political system, new government, and as well as social awareness that causes the situation in Armenia. Because I'm not sure that is the Armenian government not willing to do something or to promote democracy, democratic reforms. It's really complicated to understand this process, or they are trying to do something and they are blocked by external actors, some like Russia and so on. It's really complicated, but what we need in Armenia, and also what we need, what is important, what is the key factor for democratic transformation is the civil awareness, civil democratic awareness. You have to talk with simple people. It's good. Financial support is very good, and this is a key. It's a very important mechanism by the EU. But you have to develop. You have to strengthen this civic awareness, democratic awareness, and I think it's a long way in this region because of this historic narratives with Soviet Union and so on. But I think it would be, and geopolitical situation had also impact on the political system in Armenia. But I see that the government, this reform policy of the new government was very patchy and very superficial without any serious impact. I cannot say are they not willing to do that, or they are blocked by other external actors. It's really complicated to assess this process.
Okay, thank you very much. So then let's hand over to the last speaker, and looking into the time, I'm already at my question also a little bit as an opening question. So to promote resilience, without having ambitions also in the end, the EU. I think the EU is lacking ambitions at the moment with regard to the Eastern Partnership region, and also losing its transformative power with its internal crisis. How much this can be successful, yeah, in a way. Is the EU still a model for these countries with all its crises and its lack of ambitions? So Sonia, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think the EU has a lack of ambition, but I will try to get into this a bit later. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to join this discussion, and I would also like to extend my congratulations to the EU-South project, which I'm quite excited about, as expertise on the Caucasus is few and far between in Germany. So I think this is a great project, and I look forward to hearing more about it in the future. I was asked to discuss 3 key domestic risks, 1 main regional risk, and a chance during my short input, and I will try to get into all of them now. And maybe we can discuss the role of the EU and the resilience approach later during the discussion, which might be a bit short, but yeah, so I will jump right into it. The 3 main risks I would like to mention relate to democratic stagnation and backsliding in the region, which we have already heard from Maya and Shushanik particularly. Then I would also like to mention the lack of gender equality and minority rights and the climate crisis. And actually, I was wondering whether I'm already so mainstream that the main risks I would mention fully correspond to the risks that the EU mentions for the region. But I do think that they are very relevant. I will mostly share examples from Georgia now, as this is where I live currently, and I have most expertise on, but yeah, I will try to also compare a bit where possible. So regarding the first risk, democratic stagnation and backsliding, let me jump in with an example from a couple of days ago, namely the 18th anniversary of the Rose Revolution, which just took place. And in my humble opinion, of course, I didn't participate myself when it occurred. But I was thinking that actually right in this moment at which Georgia stands, as Maya outlined, this political crisis, polarization, I was hoping that this day could generate some energy and serve as a reminder kind of to reflect on Georgia's democratic potential, its achievements, and also the shortcomings on the road to democracy. But unfortunately, it became a partisan moment, as almost everything that we see in Georgian politics at the moment, and genuine democratic energy was very distant. What we see in Georgia in terms of problems of democratic transition also apply to Armenia to some extent, I think. I would first like to mention the lack of a developed party system based on ideologies, and also the grassroots activism that comes with political parties and rooted political parties, and which grounds the parties in society. When I think about the German political system and how the parties work and how many members they have. And then I would like to also briefly mention the lack of a democratic political culture, in the sense that when we observe how politicians treat each other day by day, there is really a lack of the culture of compromise. We have seen this over the past months, particularly with attacks against the public defender, most recently with questionable statements by representatives of the ruling party regarding withholding funding from municipalities won by the opposition. And lastly, I would like to mention the lack of genuine reforms that really also tackle the power of the ruling party, precisely because they would tackle the power of the ruling party, and specifically the failure to seriously reform the judicial system and enhance its independence from the government. Yeah, regarding gender inequality and LGBTQ rights, especially, I thought about this risk also because today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And unfortunately, while Georgia has ratified the Istanbul Convention of the Council of Europe to combat violence against women and domestic violence, Armenia has not ratified it. And this has been a very political issue over the past years. And Azerbaijan has not even signed it, although we see some feminist groups protesting to move this process forward. All three countries have very low rates of political participation of women. And although participation is not everything, I do think we need to talk more about what this means for the democratic process as a whole. And regarding minority rights, I would like to briefly mention the incident that happened in Tbilisi on 5th of July this year. Most of you will have heard that more than 50 journalists got injured. In the end, one died in the context of the Tbilisi Pride, which was cancelled in the end. And it was clear that the government did not or was unwilling to protect the rights and safety of the LGBTQ community and journalists. While I would generally say that it's not really helpful to focus the debate on minority rights and democratic development in these countries, mostly on external actors and the geopolitical environment, I would still like to mention that, of course, Russia is a factor here, and it's clear that those who oppose these rights in Georgia, they share a mindset with those in Russia who would like the country to remain in its orbit. And these opponents of civil liberties are, of course, an easy target also for disinformation campaigns, as the one that we saw before Georgia adopted the anti-discrimination law in 2015. And lastly, regarding the domestic risks on climate and environmental resilience, I would like to briefly say that we see already how urgent climate change and the climate crisis is also becoming in the region. For example, in Kakheti, temperatures are already rising and the weather is becoming more extreme overall. Storms and droughts are becoming more frequent, which endangers the agricultural sector, and not only big business, but actually also the many small farmers, which are barely surviving anyhow. I think this is also a field where a lot can be done to enhance resilience. Regarding regional risks, I would also briefly like to talk about the Karabakh War. And I think for me, this is one of the main regional risks that
2 minutes.
That there will be or might be another flare-up of the war. Although we have seen some positive trends after the last and biggest escalation since the war in 2020, about 2 weeks ago, the situation is still incredibly fragile, and the results of decades of propaganda and thousands of deaths cannot be made undone by a ceasefire deal. And I think it will take a long time until we can really feel safe, and especially Armenians and Azerbaijanis, ordinary citizens, can really feel safe regarding this conflict. I would briefly reply also to one of the questions in the chat regarding Russia's role. I disagree that Russia inserted itself into the region with having boots on the ground. I think Russia was always the main actor in the Karabakh conflict, and the main actor in security or insecurity terms in the region overall. The EU has been more visible with its grant funding, with its democracy agenda, but I don't think that it was really pulling the strings on security. And in that sense, I think not so much has changed, in fact. What has changed is Turkey's role, and I am quite concerned about Turkey's future as a country that has become very authoritarian over the last years and has become increasingly unpredictable and increasingly militaristic. So we might see some more examples of this in the future. Maybe one more sentence about how to recover from these risks. Stefan also asked a question about whether the EU lacks ambition and is losing its transformative power. I don't think so. You might call me naive, but I agree with Laila that in the long run, there is no alternative to democratization. And I think we will see it at some point, and we will see more pressures for it in all South Caucasus countries. And we have seen in other places in the region, Belarus, that the EU's normative power is still strong. And these processes just take time. And here I would also say that what we really need to see is civil courage, so to say, for people to really become politically active and to try to move things forward from within, even though it's incredibly hard. But I do think this has to happen, and this is not something the EU can do for them.
Thank you very much. I would directly read out the questions, and maybe you follow also these questions, and I would then give it in the same order back to you. We have 20 minutes left, so I would just take all the questions now which are in the chat. And then would give you the opportunity to answer this question, and you don't need to answer every question. Some are for everybody, but some are also for specific persons. So let me take here the first group of questions from one person. What do the panelists expect from the US-led Democracy Summit? In what ways is the upcoming summit significant to the short and long-term US regional policy? That would be also a question. So how much the US is relevant in the region is maybe also somehow withdrawing from the region and is playing less a role. So do you see there may be a shift also in this policy? Let's reformulate it. So with Russia's maybe growing role after the Second Karabakh War, what options does the West have in both defending democratic forces in Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, as well as in deterring Russian aggression in the region? So is there a role in the security field also in deterring Russia? And then here on civil society, what strategies can civil society organizations pursue to respond to the increasingly hostile political environment in the region? So what role of civil society? Then I take second group of question here. To everyone, is the main problem that the EU, by comprehensively sharing the values of its democracy, human rights, and the rule of law with the countries of the South Caucasus? Nevertheless, if Georgia and Armenia shared some of the EU values, Azerbaijan completely ignored not only the EU values, but also the EU institutional framework. How was it possible to become resilient if the values were partly or completely shared and the ruling elites and institutions did not meet EU standards? This applies to ruling parties, parliamentary and non-parliamentary parties, government and trade unions. So how was it possible to become resilient if the values were partly or completely shared and ruling elites and institutions did not meet EU standards? And to Sonja Schiffer's direct question, Azerbaijan has been bribing European, especially German politicians for more than a decade. Is there any chance for European and German institutions to gain back trust from Armenian actors? So to compare this, and maybe I add also a final question to this final round. I think we will not have more time for another round. So what do you think the EU should do? So additionally should do to stay or to become maybe more an actor in the region and to increase also its resilience, the impact of resilience approach. So do you see here deficits also from the EU side, or maybe opportunities also from the EU side to become more relevant and to have more impact also with this resilience approach? And I would start with Maja Panchakidze with these questions, but not all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, it's a very interesting question with the Democracy Summit in the United States. In our case, the Prime Minister was going to participate in this summit, but last minute he was not invited yet. So the president will now go to the United States, and it's a very clear sign that he is not accepted, I guess, as a participant of this summit. The expectations are, I don't know how the expectations are in Georgia from this summit, but I think that key is the democratic development in Georgia. This is the only way to move forward. And this is the field where the European Union can do more. And, you know, we did not have tradition of survival of political parties in Georgia. Who knows the Georgian history knows that after the independence, the first ruling party in Georgia was the Roundtable of Zviad Gamsahurdia. Where's the Roundtable now? When the Citizens Union of Shevardnadze defeated Roundtable and came into the government as a ruling party, Roundtable disappeared. Then the United National Movement of Saakashvili came 2003 to the power, and the party of Shevardnadze disappeared. So we had a tradition that the parties, even the ruling parties cannot survive after the governmental changes. And now we have a little progress that the UNM as a party survived after 2012, and not only survived, but became again a quite strong party with the real chances in many parts of Georgia, for example, now in the last elections, because the second runoffs were in 19 cities and municipalities in Georgia, and the candidates were always from the Georgian Dream, and the opposition, and from the opposition from United National Movement. It means that we have a little progress in party system of Georgia and in the democratic development. And this is very important to strengthen now. And this is the field where I see more possibilities for EU activities. I think that these last elections showed in Georgia that people, the voters, will learn to accept the coalition rule. Slowly, maybe, but steadily. And that's very important. This is the only positive impact of the last elections in Georgia. And is, of course, connected with the development of the civil society and the strong civil society. I hope very much that in next elections, which will be in 3 years, we'll be able to vote differently and to give chance to small European-oriented parties with really European values. I think, yeah, on Russia, I would also like to say a few words on Russia. I don't see the growing role. It was always the main role Russia played in the region. And Russia is the danger, Russia is the occupant in Georgia. So Russian factor is the main factor always when we speak about the foreign policy. But there was mentioned, Shushanik told a few words about 3+3. Georgian government assures that there are no plans to participate in these new formats. I don't know if we can trust the Georgian government now, but the official rhetoric is that Iran applied for some other relationship in this format. The Turks had also some proposals, but the Georgian government assures that there is no chance to participate. And I hope very much that that's true, because it's very dangerous for Georgia to participate in a format without our Western parties and to be in a format where Russia plays a big role. So I think that was what I wanted to say on these questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Leila?
Is it? Yeah. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Thank you, Alex, for the question. Definitely, so far, very few countries in the region felt consequences for non-transforming in the right way, for violation of democratic principles, and non-inviting, for instance, some countries, including Azerbaijan. It's a signal, of course. Whether this exclusion from the club is a serious measure, we'll see probably later, because at the moment only 4 political prisoners were released of 140 something from Azerbaijani prisons. So obviously it's not sufficient leverage to push for some greater changes. As we know, some leaders in the region and post-Soviet space are skeptical about the sincerity of the West in terms of value promotion, and they consider that this is all about realpolitik, and in the end, it's all about economic interests. So it's a complex issue, and I think, but in a sense, it's a right move, sending the signal that we are serious about, your intention to reform. About Russia, I agree with Sonia and I agree with Maya that Panchikidze, that Russia has been there from the very beginning. However, it legitimized its presence in Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan was the last stronghold in this regard, resisting Russia's presence on the ground. And right now, I find that this risk is increasing exactly because Russia has been trying for years to take the control of Azerbaijani borders. And at the moment, if Russia takes control of Azerbaijani-Armenian borders, that will be a very serious risk factor for the years ahead. Also, the problem with Russia is that there is no united, consistently united policy towards Russia. As we know, in Europe, it was quite unique. The adoption of sanctions was, united sanctions were quite unique. But in a sense, once Russia's role is viewed in the periphery of EU, all sorts of other considerations come to the fore. For instance, some attempts to outsource the security issues to Russia, probably, in an old imperial way that Russia should protect the borders of civilizations, and things like that. So it's a bit outdated policies. There are also attempts to securitize, exceeding securitization of the situation in the region by some Western actors. They bring in their relationship, the problems in the relationship with Turkey, and this way just empowering or increasing, strengthening the enemy images in the region. And then what strategies can civil society pursue to respond to increasingly hostile environment in the region? That's indeed a very serious question, but it's not just about civil society. It's about all the segments of society who are, in a sense, are victims of these problems in political order, in political lack of political freedom. So these might be individuals, this might be. And it definitely needs cross-border cooperation. So one of the major rationale behind the peaceful solution to Karabakh conflict is that exactly what Alex asked in the last question, that we can't really promote breakthrough in each individual country unless we cooperate. So this awareness that we should withdraw our attention from territorial issues, territorial conflicts, into the quality of life and quality in terms of values. And that's the next question of Ashot Alexanyan. So, we don't share values. In fact, my major, the way how I define the EU policy to the region is not about resilience, it's about the help to the societies to realize their best reform potential. So this relation between EU and countries in the region should be conducive for realization of the best reform potential. And this is not possible without definitely EU being more consistent, principled. It's not possible without cooperation between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia and various other actors. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Shushanik, you don't need to answer all the questions. So I think several things have.
I'll answer only two questions.
Yeah. You focus on
question about this democracy summit in the US in Washington. Actually, I'm a little skeptical that this summit will have an impact on US policy in the region. Because the role of the South Caucasus or this region has never been high on the agenda of the US administration. Or maybe, I don't know, it's really interesting because I think that Biden as administration is trying to send a message or to show a strong interest or to show that the US continues to have an interest in this region. But I don't have high expectations from this summit, some democracy summit, because I don't see, I don't see enough political scope for action for US or for the European Union. The second question, what should the EU do? So the European Union created special tools in recent years, such as the European Neighbourhood Policy and Eastern Partnership Initiative and power. However, but it distanced itself from the conflicts in the region, and it has never played an important role in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And EU promoted its model of soft power towards South Caucasus, but we saw that the soft power was not enough to resolve this dispute, and it was not enough to resolve this conflict. EU created different mechanisms. However, EU did not engage in this political debate and in the analysis and the evolution, and this Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was one of the most difficult disputes for the EU decision makers. Now is the moment when the EU must show its unity and support for its neighborhood. There is a huge amount to be done, both in Nagorno-Karabakh itself and also in Armenia, that would benefit from European expertise. And I think that many civil actors would benefit from European expertise in partnership with US agencies and from reconstruction and demanding to facilitate settlement and so on. And we see that the real winners of the latest Nagorno-Karabakh conflict are Turkey and Russia. And Moscow has gained greater control over Armenia's domestic and foreign policies, and Turkey has much more military and security leverage over future developments in Azerbaijan, as long as the EU continues to focus almost exclusively on diplomatic and economic means to exercise power in its neighborhood. This trend will continue. And in my opinion, we need stronger EU policy and stronger image, geopolitical regional image from the EU in this region.
Thank you. Sonia?
Yeah, thanks. I would say that maybe it's not really correct to say that the EU is geopolitically inactive. I would say that it is active, but in a different way, namely through its soft power, which is also its competitive advantage, because this is something, and how it works on democratization in the region, or for democratization in the region, is not something that Turkey and Russia do. And I think this is seen by the citizens in all three South Caucasus countries who care about democracy. But of course, this is something which works slowly. And as Shushanik just said, this is not something which allows the EU to exert influence in an acute crisis or war. We have seen the EU becoming more active now with regard to Karabakh. The EP friendship group with Armenia has been re-established recently. Also, the EU will host Pashinyan and Aliyev on the sidelines of the Eastern Partnership Summit. But I am still wondering what the EU can really contribute. And I have the impression that the EU doesn't really know so much itself. And I am a bit concerned that the EU might get dragged into bankrolling this illiberal peace that we have discussed, because it has money and it doesn't really know how to really exert political influence. So it could be easy to say, okay, we invest in this road or in this new railway without really getting political influence. And I think this is not really where we should go, or at least we should reflect on this very critically. Regarding Azerbaijan and Germany, I think this is a very good question, and I think primarily we have to work on corruption issues within Germany, and I do hope that the next German government will do a much better job at this. We will also have a lobby registry from next year. But for example, another issue that I've also been looking at while I was working at the Bundestag is to create rules for MPs who participate in these fake election observation missions, which legitimize authoritarian elections, which I also think is really a shame. So there are some issues that can be done. Regarding Armenia, I think, and I'm very clear about it, the new German government should add Armenia to its list of transformation partners, and it will, according to the coalition agreement, it will reconsider the BMZ 2030 list, the development cooperation list, and I really hope that Armenia will become part of it. Also because when I talk to our partners in Armenia, the picture is very diverse. Some, unfortunately, are very pessimistic. Others do see specific individuals in ministries who do have potential, let's say, and who have some ambition for reform still. So I do think that Germany entering with the strong development cooperation could make a difference here. And also, I think in general, Germany and the EU should increase the focus on conditionality. And this is also something that was explicitly mentioned in the German coalition agreement. So I think this is a really good thing, and I hope it will be also politically implemented. Lastly, about the resilience approach and democracy and its possibility to impact democracy in the region. First of all, I would say that the EU, I think, also has to do some expectation management because it is not a strong military actor or not a military actor at all, and it will not become in any way comparable in that sense to Russia and Turkey. And also in terms of enlargement, I recently saw that 25% of Georgian citizens and 30% of ethnic Georgians actually believe that Georgia will join the EU in the next 5 years. So there is also a communication problem here, I think. And regarding the concept of resilience, I do think that it's an interesting approach and that it's quite broad, and it can provide some new perspectives on what to do in the region that are all kind of related to democracy and good governance, as Stefan said in the beginning, but are also broader and include such issues as climate change and digitalization and so on. But what I would also find very interesting about resilience, and this is maybe something we can discuss during the next discussion, that resilience always also includes kind of your positive sources of resilience. And here I am wondering, what are these sources in the region? Can we identify them, and can we work on them in order to strengthen resilience? And yeah, here I have not seen a lot of discussion, so maybe this could be a topic for us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just maybe 2 or 3 words in the end, and then I really finish this really fascinating discussion. So if I'm looking, just to add this, if I'm looking, and these are classics, what are the main obstacles also for domestic, not developing domestic resilience? So I think still it's vested interests of elites. There are economic and vested interests, it's weak institutions, and it's a fragile civil society. And I think what we rather see in all 3 countries is that people leaving the country. I think that's the big discussion now also in Georgia with this political situation. Everybody is saying we are leaving the country. And I think this also happens in the other 2 countries. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And we see this, for instance, if you compare it with Moldova, there's a lack of people to do the reform process. There's a lack of people who can then really do the change with a government which has this chance to change things. Just a second point, I think on Russia, sure, I think geopolitically and from the military perspective, Russia is dominating. But we can also say in all 3 countries, Russia is highly unpopular. Also in Armenia, Russia is not a reliable partner. Also the Armenians had to learn that they will not get supported. And so Georgia, we can say the same. And in Azerbaijan, I think it's not a close friend. Yeah, so I think it's a country you have to balance. And I think we could see the same development in Belarus, losing the society, in Ukraine, just keeping Crimea and Donbass. So I think Russia is losing influence in a region which is getting highly diverse and is developing away from Russia. The question is, who offers them the concepts of policy and a perspective also for this region? Is it the EU, or is it maybe third powers who are coming in increasingly in the region, like Turkey and maybe also on the point China? That's the question. So I think we all hope and we all think it's the EU, because these are the concepts where maybe the people are staying. But I think we have here increasing competition also with other players than Russia in these regions. And I think that's also the question, if they offer any alternative. So I want to thank this great panel and the way you have discussed this topic. I think it's very complex. We really should further develop and discuss it. And I think it's great that in Jena is this research project on resilience. I think that's a huge opportunity also to learn from your research, also maybe on later events. And I also want to thank the University of Jena and Zeus for setting up this event. And thank you all for joining and discussing with us. So I really enjoyed very much the discussion. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.